Hello and welcome back to Planet Coaster, where we will be working on our building tutorial that we've been doing for the past couple weeks. Last time we left off, we were talking about gray boxing and how this is a really good way to concept out building shapes so that you can ease yourself into the design and detailing process as you go forward. Now, when you become more and more comfortable with building in Planet Coaster, you can eventually start skipping the gray box phase altogether, or at least even do an even more basic version than what we've done previously. But I think early on, I do encourage it because it's a good quick way to rough in a whole area of a park down to just one building. And it's just, in my opinion, the easiest way to just ease yourself into just basic building concepts in the game itself. So what I want to go over today is detailing out and possibly making a tile set for different themes and things like that. And what I'm going to be talking about are the three keys that I use, or checkboxes that I follow when I'm kind of detailing out a structure. So these are foundation. You got the support columns as well. And you get the miscellaneous kind of details. So these three categories are, to me, what make a building somewhat believable. And of course, you can have more than three elements. Three is kind of just the bare minimum, I think, that you are required to make something believable. Say, if I was just drawing something, you know, we're going to have shadow, we got to have midtones, you got to have highlights. Without all three of those, the drawing might not quite look right. And that's just kind of what I derive from when I'm making a build like this. So even these gray boxes do follow these elements. So early on, you can spot there is a foundation, and this is a weighted element. And whether the foundation is pushed out or pushed in is up to you. That's a design decision. If you wanted to make it look more weighty, like we are here, that is what pushing it out does. It makes the structure look very heavy at the bottom. If you push the foundation inward, what that'll make it look like is the walls themselves, I'll show you, will actually look like they are separate from the foundation still, but pushed out. And you can get this neat little overhang. A lot of modern buildings kind of do this, where the foundation is, say, brick, and then the wooden siding is above ground. And this is to prevent, say, termites from getting into the wooden siding and things like that. So as long as you have a foundation, I think a building can be successful. Also, we have supporting elements in these as well. From the columns holding up weighty additions that create airspace in here. We have columns holding up roof lines, and we also just have vertical elements in general. So you want to have vertical elements going up through your building, the load-bearing sections of your structure. Usually these are the corners or about the midpoint of buildings, depending on what theme set you are using. It depends on the materials. You have to kind of consider that when you're deciding on what supports you would like to show in the sides there. And then finally, just the miscellaneous details. These, category into the actual window placement, door placement, siding, colors, and these are the final steps beyond the base structure itself. These are kind of the finishing touches, if you will. And you can just keep adding layer upon layer of this final step until you get a good, detailed out structure. But as long as you have all three, your building is going to be pretty successful. If we head over here to our construction that we did kind of real time, we will be detailing this out and going over what I do generally to make a little tile set. Now this structure here looks like a small cottage, especially with this chimney shape kind of coming off this main L-shaped first floor foundation here. And so we're going to be using a thatch roof here. We're going to be using some other tips and tricks to get this done. This corner, I reworked it a little bit. It didn't look quite right with it being so low, so I raised it up off the ground a little ways. That way you can get some variation in just the wall itself. So we'll just go ahead and I'll show you guys how to make a tile set. And tile sets, usually I make them in groups of 3, depending. For a small structure like this, I may not use a specific tile set. Tile sets can also be for many different sizes, from using a simple 4 meter by 4 meter. You can also make a tile set that is 4 by 8. You can make a tile set that's 4 by 8 on the width as well. So you can do wide tiles, tall tiles. When I say tiles, these are just the repeating elements of the building that you use to kind of wrap around the structure. So these tiles, they are going to be made out of the final material that the structure is going to be made out of. And this is, since I'm going a little bit more fantasy or medieval here, we're going to go with a plaster siding here. The foundation will stick with stone. So we will come up with our plaster just like that. And we will decide the base foundation, and you can get ideas for what materials to necessarily use by looking at Google Images and things like that, and that will give you an idea on what people have used in the past, present, and hopefully future, if our art kind of dictates what we might be building like here in 100 years. So this is the base kind of tile set, in the sense that this is the back wall, and this is the stone foundation. Now the stone foundation, you can make any color. You can make the plaster really any color. Just make sure they don't clash too ridiculous. Usually the foundation I make a little bit darker, because dark colors make the thing feel a little bit more heavy, and lighter colors make it look a little bit more light and bright, so that makes it look less in weight. So we'll change the foundation. I don't want to really use this normal brick here, so we will transition into more of a standard just cobblestone of some kind, though you might even want to think about adding just a touch of color in these things, because you're not always going to find perfectly gray rocks and stones. This is taking up a lot more color than I thought it would, so we will change this one. And you can get, you know, some different stone colors. This is just an example. I'm not really going to go into color theory right now with you guys. I think that's a little too advanced to go into. But beyond that, we want to capture some columns as well. And since this is a plaster buildings a lot of the time have a lot of wooden elements. And the vertical elements tend to be thicker. So we will use the thick wooden column on these parts, and you just want to sink it in straight into the tile there. Now tile sets are meant to be used in a repeatable kind of fashion, and so that's something to consider. I'm going to first just lay out the details, because I think that's kind of important. For me, another trick to use on kind of these timber framed fantasy homes is that the wooden elements can get a little complicated, and so you're going to have some thinner wooden boards going across maybe the bottom to reinforce the bottom part of the wall so it can hold more weight to it, and it can also just make the structure look nice with these thinner wooden planks kind of going across. You know, they're not going to use the heavier elements here, they're going to use thinner. Another little thing that you'll find in timber framed kind of buildings like this is the fact that they will use cross members and then support them at angles. But this is all stuff you kind of learn just by looking online to see other real world buildings and what they do. And you just want to copy this essentially over here. And this is a blank wall. So this is really all you really need for the first tile. You know, you establish the base look, and then you go ahead and make a copy of it. So here, we'll go ahead and add another detail, kind of in the detail element, the third step. So we have the foundation, the pillars, and the load bearing. And the detail can be from windows to doors, porch elements, fence elements, things like that. Here, we're just going to grab a simple window. You'll probably want to change the color to match the wood of the frame of the building a little bit. And you're going to be using the advanced move tool a lot when you are detailing out a structure. In fact, you can partially in sync a window frame just to get the frame itself, and then say you want a different interior kind of element in there to get a different pattern. You can inset a different window type into it, and you can do this. Now, a lot of the times, depending on the material of the item, you might not be able to get the color exactly right on the first go. And tell you what, let's get rid of that one, and we will just simply backfill this element. So knowing kind of what each piece does and how you can use them just comes with practice. But there, you made a little custom window by using another Windows frame, adding a different glass type in there, and then I use the back side of it to kind of fill in that white space so you don't see the wall behind it. And that's a nice little cottage window. They will also occasionally, cottages, not just occasionally, actually all the time basically, have shutters on them and things like this. And they can add another detail. So you're basically just stacking these things on top of each other, almost like you're mixing and mashing the models together to create something new and interesting. The color of this shutter, I never tried to keep with the default. Tell you what, let's make it kind of a neutral, slightly green color there. There, so now they have some shutters. They can close these if they want some privacy, or these are actually storm shutters, so they would shut them to protect the window from like the wind, twigs blowing around, things like that in a storm. And from there, you have a window tile. So there's your window tile. And we can move on, copy that if you want, or you can copy the blank one. It doesn't really matter which one you do copy there. And now we can think about the doorway. The doorway, another major important part of the structure. And since we're going kind of with the cottagey look, I do prefer this item right here. It has a nice stone frame going around the door and kind of a thick iron rod hinges here and handle, and it does look rather nice. We're going to grab and change the color of the surrounding to a lighter kind of just stonework color to kind of match the foundation, because any stonework should be cohesive from the foundation up and around. So there is that. And we want to, you know, I'm fine with a red door. That's okay. And at this point, you know, since this is the doorway, I'm going to bump the foundation out just one there. And we're going into the roof tool. And let's grab a wooden deck. Rotate this down 90 degrees so it can act as the floor to a little porch. Sometimes you don't need much, but jutting it out just enough to make it look a little different can be nice. Just make sure to seal up any corners so that when we copy and paste this next to another wall section, they will match up. Now, when you are making tile sets, there is this extra little thing to consider. Now that we've kind of copied these next to each other, you can see that there is a gap in between these vertical beams. So it's okay sometimes to leave things like this. However, this is how you fix it, because you want your tiles to fit generally fairly flush. So we can just adjust them ever so slightly so they're now touching. Move this out and move the window to the other side. You can see this side's off, but we'll just move it ever so slightly here so that there's just no gaps. Now, you can also perhaps just have one pillar and have a pillar centered in between these two so that it acts like the pillar on both tile sets. That's kind of an advanced thing to know, just so you don't get these double wide pillars in areas. But for now, for this simple thing, I'm quite happy to have the thicker vertical elements, just because the walls themselves are a little plain inherently right now. So this is there. And the nice thing is, once you kind of establish the new wood spacing, because we're using that as the base, it might help if I actually select the whole tile. So to select the whole tile, I know I've kind of covered this before, you just want to drag your mouse around the whole thing, and then if you miss any extra little bits and bobs, you can just copy that over by holding left control and selecting it. And so here we will just recreate the original wall tile, just so the two pillars are perfectly aligned to that. And you can see us just move this over one, boom, it is sealed together at this point. Okay, so 3 tiles is the absolute bare minimum you need to wrap your buildings. Things like doors, things like windows. You can also have window variants. So if we say copy this again and make another window variant, you can do that. If you copy the blank wall again and maybe add some extra little wooden details, you can do that. And you can just slowly build up a tile set for the structure itself. There are things to kind of take note of. If you are building a 2-story structure, sometimes I build the tile sets both at the same time. So I'll do the lower floor and the upper floor and connect them just as I'm building it, because that makes the whole thing a little bit more cohesive as you work upwards. But what I'm going to do real quick is just go in and retexture our current building with these simple tiles that we just made. And when you do this, you might have to kind of custom fit some areas, but that's kind of a as you go kind of feeling. Like for example, back here, if we delete these 2 walls like this, and we just quickly, let's separate these again so they're just easier to highlight if they're all separated. There we go. So if we grab these 2 blank walls, because this is a chimney area, you may not actually find a lot of windows on here. So this is a good contender for the blank walls. And then as you go through here, we can add the 2 windows to the corners of this section. And we're just copying everything by holding Control D and then putting it into position. Okay, and you're going to get sometimes space that just needs filler. However, that's real easy to kind of just throw together by copying certain elements. You can drag elements to the left and the right, and you can create a tile that really wasn't there before because you didn't account for using a quarter grid like this. And it's really easy to just grab elements and shift it around until it's in the position that you need. It's essentially just making an extra little tile to blend these 2 other ones together. You might get Z fighting as well from just these elements overlapping each other. That's kind of normal for these building games, but from far away, you don't really notice it. And you can see just the charm of the building slowly forming just with these simple tile sets that we've made so far. But yeah, as I said, I'm going to go ahead and skin this out just real quick. And then for the last 5 minutes or so, I'm going to talk about maybe the extra details in here, like the chimney area, getting that fleshed out, because that's, I mean, you can make a tile out of this because we gray boxed it in there. You could move this out and essentially tile it. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to just freeform build that detail. Some detail I prefer just doing kind of freeform because it's a little bit better looking than making a tile. And these lower walls are going to have to be a little bit of custom. The roof will have to be custom as well, just because the angle that I'm going to get on here. But it's pretty straightforward stuff if you just know how to make little tiles and things. So let's just go ahead and see what this thing looks like. Okay, so I went ahead and wrapped most of this building. There are some minor details that I want to cover kind of in real time with you guys. But this is basically what you can do with a basic tile set. And what we have here are the kind of final variants that I came up with to get the overall shape and the wood all laid out on this thing. Some of this was just built directly on the structure and then removed to show you that, you know, this is what the tile ended up looking like, because you do have to make some specialty pieces every now and then just to stitch areas together. But with the second floor, I decided to basically use very similar elements to the first floor. However, instead of this thick foundational stone, I went with more of this slate brick. And that is one, to keep the color kind of consistent in between the two floors, but also provide a little bit of a break in just the wooden texture itself. I think it turned out okay. You know, there's more details that I can definitely add to this building, and we will be covering that next episode where we go in and make it look really unique. Because right now we're at the basic stage. You know, the building is shaped out and a lot of the framework is done, but there's things you can add, you know, points of interest onto here, from the light sources to window boxes, you know, flowers, trees, and the scenery itself around it is, in my mind, part of the building. So that's what we'll be covering next episode. But at the end of it, you can kind of see the current stage of the item and how we kind of mix in some of the elements here. And right now, I went ahead and made a little bit of a roof line, just using this custom kind of thatch roof overhang piece. This is kind of the most versatile thatch piece to use when you are doing roofing. They do have a, you know, actual roof element, but that is mainly used at the steeper slope. We are doing a little bit more of a 45-degree angle here, so we had to kind of make our own roof to take across this. But luckily it's pretty easy to just kind of copy this around and just drag this down to create the whole thing. And this is one method, you could say, to complete and stylize a roof. Definitely want some overhang on this side of the building. I think it can look really nice if you do that. I actually need just a little bit more, so I'm going to hold control and grab the previous selection a little bit and just give us a little bit more room there. I believe this peak is technically the same angle as the slightly taller variant here, and it is. So we can use this just like here, and you can kind of move these pieces around and use them a little bit more interchangeably than one would initially think. Okay, making sure those peaks are aligned because it didn't quite look like it was. Alright, not bad. I do like the fact that the doorway here is once higher than the windows, because what this can imply, this jut itself, maybe on the interior, the roof line is here, but to get onto this upper deck, possibly, if you have an element like this, it could look like there's a staircase on the inside, just slightly beyond the door, that allows you to reach this exit point on the hovel. So we'll just copy these down. And roofing, you know, you can make your own tiled roof. If you want to see a whole lot of those, you can refer to my large kind of core build that we've been working on for the past few months, where I go in and make some mini overly complicated tile pieces and get those working for us in an Asian theme. So, you know, you don't have to use thatch for everything. I'm going to copy these over just so we can extend the roof line just a hair, make that flush. And it looks like this needs to come down a little bit so it's not poking through. All right. And there you go. That's the upper roof. And it looks pretty neat. Now, when you are using thatch and kind of copying it around, it does create a little bit of a pattern. You can add wooden elements on top of this. In fact, I'm going to do that just along the spine of the roof here. Also, depending on where the sun is hitting it, it can create some shadow elements as well. So we will create our own little custom topper. And I do like to use a similar motif. We have the thick board and then the thin line the upper section makes when we sink it in just partially down into the thatch. Very similar to what we did down in the foundation. And then you can just copy, rotate this over 90 degrees. Just make sure that the ends are lining up, and you don't want to poke quite past the thatch, so you just want it to end right in line with it. Otherwise, it could look just a little weird. And these need to come up just a hair as well, because we need that other secondary line there. Okay. And stop here. Raise this up to there, and there you have it. There's the nice little top of the thatch roof. So, you know, it's pretty easy to do things like this, and you can even thatch up these lower roofing pieces, though sometimes I do like to use different roof elements on different sections of the build, just so there's variety throughout, in which case, for example, here, what I imagine this lower piece to be could be a little bit of a kitchen area that would just add it on at some point, hence the smaller windows and smaller roof line. You can add a chimney back here as well, just so it looks like there's an oven and things like that. But it's all about kind of creating these story elements into your builds. And it will help drive you to create something a little bit more cohesive and uniform. And it gives you purpose to what you're actually doing. Because it's never really fun to build something and you just don't know why it's laid out in the way it is. And if you invent yourself a little story, it can definitely help with that feeling. And the theming does help with that generically. So, you know, having a somewhat fantasy cottage, townhouse. Yeah, this is actually way bigger than a cottage looking at it. Maybe the lower portion was the original cottage and then just expanded upon as the family grew and continued upgrading. Who knows? Have the little bit of chimney being worked on as well. So we'll just go ahead and swap these out, and we'll swap these out for some actual bricks, because doing your own custom brickwork can be a little tough. Might as well just use the default pieces that they give you, and I think we'll want to use the red brick here. Cool. And that's going to just jut out from the wall a little bit. We'll align the chimney a little bit more in line here, and then we'll just kind of confirm its positioning, even maybe lower it down because it just looks a little too tall compared to the rest of the roof line. And since this is kind of placed, we can go ahead and just lay out a timber frame just along the roof to make it match the rest of the building. And there you have it. That is how I go about detailing out the rough shape and also the rough first pass of details. Usually I do things in 2 passes, so I can kind of take a look at it at certain stages and then add balance to it at the end. So for example, we'll probably end up adding some flower planters. We'll add up some little garden areas along the foundation as well, just to make that look even more wide and load bearing. Some additional tall trees will also help bring up some vertical elements as well. Anyways, if you guys are enjoying the tutorial series and a little bit more of the real-time building that I'm doing right now, you might also enjoy the live stream that I am trying to do weekly. This weekend I'm going to be out of town, so sadly, you won't be able to see me then, but it usually takes place on Sundays. Also, if you're new to the channel, I do create daily videos here, and I also create some pretty cool stuff. So, if you guys like the video, leave a like, leave a comment down below, and I'll see you all in the next episode of Planet Coaster.